So welcome to the Intern Whisperer. Our show is all about the future of work and innovation. My guest today is Chris Harden, and I am Isabella Johnston. Chris is an engineer. He was an engineer manager with the artificial intelligence team with Unity Technologies, and he is now the head of project management for North American Services. I've known Chris from the startup community in Orlando, Florida, and for us in this world, he is a bit of a legend because he appeared on Shark Tank, and not everybody in our startup world did. And that, I remember when he came in and he talked to us about that. What landed him there was a role as a co-founder of TROBO. It is a storytelling robot, and it was a connected plush toy that read stories about science and math to children ages 2 to 5. It was so cute. He's going to tell us more about it, and using iPhones and iPads. And in reality, I think books really, when we read to children, they're also for adults. So you actually get to teach the adults as well as the kids. Writing is in his blood. He's published a book to benefit agile teams that struggle to make deadlines. The book is entitled Mastering Commitment for Software Development Teams to Solve Your Problems. We're going to have a link for you in the show description. And he has another book that recently dropped right at the end of 2023. So you can buy it now and you'll be ready for the 2024 Christmas. It is called Stanley and the Candy Cane Wormhole, and it's for tiny humans. Available on order at Amazon, and we will have the link in the show description. So that was a really long description of you, but there's so much that you've done. I'm so happy to have you here. Our show is always about learning technology and the future of industries. So welcome, Chris. I'm glad.
Thank you, Isabel. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, so am I. So that you're here. Tell us about yourself using 6 words and why those 6.
Okay, so first, I'm a dad, so I have 2 kiddos. My son is Asher, and he's 11, and well, now 12, and my daughter is Finley, and she's 7. So I love being a dad. It's been driving me my whole life, and it's one of the best jobs and the hardest jobs, as they say, that you can have. The second is I'm a husband, so I'm married to a psychiatrist. Her name is Laurie, and she has a practice downtown. She's an entrepreneur, and I love being a husband as well, and the partnership that we have as a family. It's so far been going great, and very grateful for that. And I guess actually grateful is my third word. I got lucky. God gave me health, and my family's healthy, and I got to live in the U.S., which is the land of opportunity. It sounds a little corny, but we can pretty much put our minds to whatever we need to here. And for the most part, as long as we're healthy, we can do okay. And I try to stay grateful and mindful of that every day. And so gratitude is a big deal for my family. Career-wise, I'm an engineer. I still consider myself an engineer, even though you don't really pay me to code anymore. I do code a little bit on the side and do some scripting and that kind of stuff to stay technical. And I have an engineering career that's about 25 years long now. I'm also artistic, so I've spent years doing comic books. I used to illustrate independent comic books, and I was an inker, or at least an assistant inker for those who know what comic books, the process for Marvel and DC and Dark Horse, all the major publishers, which was fun. I also have a background in illustration. I was in industrial design for a while, so a lot of artistic skills there that I have used in my engineering career to sort of make myself different and not just as a standard engineer. And then my last word is creator. I tend to always want to spend what time I have left on the planet creating something. I tend to think of people as consumers and creators, and in different domains, you are a different role player. So I love film, and I can get mesmerized by most films. I also really love to watch a football game. So there I'm a consumer, but I spend the majority of my free time creating in some way. I have a hard time sitting and just watching TV or being casual. I'm always trying to do something to create and push whatever agenda I have forward. And I try to teach my kids about being creators as well. And my wife and I talked a lot about the difference between being artistic and creative and being a creator. And, we, as engineers, you can create and never draw anything. So I like to have the mindset of I'm always creating and using the time I have here. And I try to teach my kids the same thing, as opposed to always just consuming. It's like, how can you do something different from the planet and use your time here to create? And that's a kind of a big word for me, but that'd be the last one.
I like the fact that you pulled creator in. usually people say creative. I've not had anybody say creator in all of the time I've done my podcasting. And I find that very interesting because, one is more of a noun. It's there where it can also be used as a verb, but we share something, and that's a spiritual belief. And I like that you use that word creator for that reason too. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it because when you think of the world and everything in it, you have to be. And if you're somebody that is a Christian, then you believe that all of this was created by a creator and you are in his image. Yeah. So we'll throw that one out there. Okay. So those were really great 5 words, but where did you go to school? How did you get to where you are? And tell us why you're doing the entrepreneur stuff.
So I went to school at Auburn University first, and that was electrical engineering, and that was back in the late 90s. And I also went to school to get an MBA when my wife was at medical school at the University of South Florida. So, go Tigers and go Bulls. And I also spent a year in film school up at FSU, actually. So that was lots of fun. Didn't complete it because we had our first kiddo, and I wanted to be more of a father than a film producer. But anyhow, so my career started out at Auburn. Then I came down here to Orlando and spent 6 years doing theme parks. So I worked for a company called Alcorn McBride, and got to go on site, Disney and Universal, et cetera, out in Las Vegas, and spent 6 years doing that. When my wife got to medical school, we went to Tampa and started working remotely for an engineering organization out of Seattle doing consulting engineering. So I've always been like a software developer. I went more and more from hardware to software design over the years. And because I have the artistic background, I do a lot of user interface design work, so I have a UX kind of background. And spent 6 years doing that. As I mentioned, went to film school. And then I came to Orlando, started working for EA Sports, and that was my first foray into game development. So we have a studio here called Tiburon, making Madden and NBA Live and a bunch of other sports games. And spent a few years there shipping games, which was a lot of fun. Hard industry to be in sometimes, but really creative, and it was lots of fun. Then we founded TROBO. So Jeremy Scheinberg and I co-founded TROBO. Jeremy was an engineer that I worked with at Alcorn, and we went to a startup weekend, actually. I had an idea for a completely different app, and Jeremy had this sort of a kernel of an idea for what he wanted to do with what became TROBO. And we just kind of ran into each other there, and one thing led to another. We ended up forming a little team around the concept that became TROBO, and we took second place, and so that sort of started us out on the journey that was TROBO. It was at a time in Orlando where the tech scene was really burgeoning in terms of entrepreneurship. The Exchange downtown had just installed the new location there. Orlando was getting a lot of groundswell around the tech scene, and even Buddy Dyer was awesome and supportive. And so this whole community grew. And just the story on TROBO was we had a $65,000 Kickstarter, so that launched us. And then we got an NSF grant, and that funded us for a year. And a bunch of artists that were here actually in Orlando also got funded to help build the content that was for TROBO. And it was making little stories, interactive stories on an iPad. And so you could take your child on a journey. There's a little avatar and all this stuff. Anyhow, so TROBO lasted for about 3 years, but after Shark Tank, we could not get funding to get to the next level. So we got a handshake deal on Shark Tank, and that was great, but we couldn't meet eye to eye with the shark. So that deal did fall through. But after a year, we realized that there's a lot of money that you need to launch a toy and get it into mainstream. And we were not willing to take that financial risk. So we let TROBO die down for on the 3rd year. Jeremy went back to Universal Studios, and he's there now, and doing quite well. And I went back to EA, and I spent a little more time at EA. Then I became the VP of engineering for a Department of Defense company called DISTI here in town. So
I've heard of it.
Yeah, they had just received VC funding. They were looking for someone who could bring enterprise experience in and set DISTI up for growth. And so I came in and did that for a couple of years. And then Unity wanted to establish a studio in Orlando. And so I and the chief revenue officer from Disney actually founded the studio that is now Unity here in Orlando. And we grew that. It's the government the government group. It's now around 50 people in Orlando that serves the military simulation community that we have here, which is really a proliferant user of Unity's engine.
Yeah, I did not know all of that. That is so interesting.
It was lots of fun. I was actually hired by the AI group because they saw this whole government opportunity that wasn't being taken advantage of, and they wanted to see if the artificial tech that we had back then would be adoptable into the government market. And so we spent time building the contracts and the services and putting some AI into the government group, and that was around 2.5 years. And then I left that group and moved over to the games group, and I'm running the services group there now. So
wow.
Yeah, so that's my core career. I've always had a core career because it pays the bills and it's fun. And then on the side, besides TROBO, I've done about 7 different side businesses. I published a comic book when I was really young, so not a comic, but a graphic novel called The Fro. And it did okay in the market. It wasn't a slam dunk, but it was a good learning opportunity. And as you mentioned, I just published Stanley and the Candy Cane Wormhole. So it is a children's book, and it is targeted towards the Christmas market. And it's really trying to solve some problems in the Christmas market where I don't necessarily think that the current Christmas Santa folklore is very inclusive, and it's not really value driven as much as I'd like. So the book centers around a squirrel that discovers wormholes and how he can use those to deliver gifts for Christmas. And Santa can't keep up with all the workload, so he wants the squirrel to help him out. But it has 7 values in there for families. Gratitude is one of them, helping and that kind of stuff, being brave. And so he goes on this journey, and he learns how to make the wormhole stable so that he can deliver Christmas gifts year after year. And there's a game called Find Stanley, because the wormholes are not great, but when he goes to deliver your gift, he gets lost in your house. And so the kids go and try to find Stanley, and it's a treasure hunt game, and they practice values along the way. So they'll practice patience for 20 seconds. They'll stand there and just be calm and patient before they go off to the next room to see what the next clue is to help find the gift that Stanley tried to deliver.
I like that game.
Yeah, it's really cute. It gets 4.5 stars. The development cycle was 2 years of user trials, about $1,000 each Christmas. I invested in very close families. A lot of Shark Tank families were a part of that. A lot of Star Studio families and local Orlando studios. And I basically have, my community, as you would imagine, like you have your community.
Yeah.
And so we did it. I did the first year, however many families it was, it had a different game mechanic, and it was wretchedly terrible. And so I learned that game was just, even I didn't want to play it when we were doing it that Christmas. So I restarted the game design. That summer, I did a game mechanic with the treasure hunt. Was brilliant. Applied that the second year. That was the best part of the experience. And then that's what I launched with on Kickstarter, not this year, but last summer. And it was a $10,000 Kickstarter. Not huge, but it was enough to launch the book and the game and all that.
Do you think you need 10,000 to launch a book? I did a children's book, and it's, I'll just tell it to you, but I know the show's about you, but it's God is dog spelled backwards, and it's showing the attributes of God, but we see it through a dog, and I back it up with Bible verses. I don't have an illustrator.
It's charming.
Thank you. But I was going to do it just as a free download, an ebook, and then I wasn't even go through any place, but just promote it that way, and people could make a donation, and then the donation is going to go to help children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Let me know if I can read it. I'd love to get a copy just to read it.
Yeah, I'll share it with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can, if it's ready to buy, I'll buy it,
It doesn't have the illustrations yet. Okay. So I'm looking for an illustrator that's a believer and, that would put it in there. And I went, oh, forget it. I'll just do AI art. And it was supposed to be dogs, different kinds of dogs. So we would have diversity of dogs. And so we don't think of God as always the same. Yeah. He looks different for whatever, maybe what you look like.
Well, let me know offline. We could talk about it.
Yeah,
I'd love to see what you're doing with it.
Okay.
Quite keen on the AI conversation as well. I've investigated AI myself for my books. There's a real challenge, by the way, on that, just segue, where if you have one central character, it's hard to keep the consistency across the pages. But if you're doing a bunch of different characters, it should be relatively straightforward.
Yeah.
What were we talking about? So,
well, back to your book, though.
Yes.
And we were talking about getting your book out to the market, and you said,
10,000.
yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I tend to want to wrap a product around a story, not just a book if I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's pros and cons. So no, you don't need a $10,000 Kickstarter for a book.
Okay.
Usually $2,000 will get you there if you want to do a print run in China.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to just go through Kindle delivery, Kindle has a print to order. There's nothing you got to do. You just got to publish it out there and then use marketing dollars to get it out to whoever you want to sell it to. So no, you don't have to. But when I added the game mechanic, there was a game deck. It's 66 cards. So there's that. And I also had to buy, there's also a food thing you do, a little candy kit that you put together for the kids to make a candy cane wormhole. And so all that tallied up to about break even at $10,000. That's what that was. This year I introduced a plush to the game for the Finds family. So actually find a little plush. And that was about a $4,000 investment itself. So depending on what you add onto your book, you can start at the basics if you want to do a print run around 2,000 and it can grow. But everything you add on is going to cost money. And that you think, okay, I can sell more books with a plush. Yeah, but you got to sell the plush too. So it's just think of it in terms of what all do you have to sell at the end of the day. And
how to package it. Yeah. Did you do a t-shirt with it too? A t-shirt would be great.
I didn't. So we did Kickstarter t-shirts with Trobo. And it's funny, one of the first pieces of advice that I got was from this guy who'd been doing Kickstarter forever. He's like, don't make a t-shirt. No one wants your shirt. Don't do that. He said, don't add all these extra stuff on. Don't do that. It's just confusing. The consumer needs to come in and know exactly what they got to buy. 2 or 3 options tops. And we learned the hard way that all the extra noise just meant extra work and shipping and stuff. And it really didn't add a whole lot of value. If you go down and the difference between Trobo, we were launching Trobo. We did have to see market fit with Trobo, but even with Stanley, it was, can I reach market fit with this Kickstart? Which means all the extra stuff I can't do. I need to know if people are going to buy it at that price and reach market fit. And that was in a way a test. Kickstarter is a great way to test whether or not you have real market fit, if you can get enough strangers to buy your stuff.
Right.
So all the extra stuff, it makes more work for you on the end, but it doesn't really confirm market fit like you can if you just focus on your core product.
Oh, this is fascinating. I don't think anybody explained it that way in any of my in any of the accelerator courses. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's really good tips for sure. I don't know who that mentor was. I'm going to assume maybe it was somebody from Starter Studio.
It wasn't. It was an old friend from my high school.
Oh, yeah. Well, you should give him a little shout out.
I did. I was really grateful. He was spot on. So.
Oh, very, very nice. Okay. So let's switch gears just a little bit. What hard lesson have you experienced that gave you a deeper understanding of what empathy is?
So, I grew up really poor. So, grew up in deep South Alabama. Didn't have, parents didn't have a whole lot of money, and that became a core goal for me growing up, is to how to build financial wealth. So I'm doing that. I'm financially independent. Things are going well, and grateful to God and all the support He's given me. And but I know when I visit home and see friends and family, I know when I speak with underserved communities, they don't have that information. You can't get that information unless you have a mentor who's proactively teaching you, or if your parents happen to, or whoever's taking care of you happens to know finance, personal finance, and how to teach you that. So my heart goes out to kiddos who don't have the parents who can teach them that yet. And eventually I do want to publish a book. It's around a certain metaphor that I'm developing, or that will teach, honestly, poor kids how to build personal wealth and have that vocabulary and even awareness of it, so they can kind of get out of this sort of fishbowl that they're stuck in. And so I empathize a lot with families who don't have that information, because you can't get it unless you are patient and you continue to learn over the years. But it takes a while to get there.
It does.
Yeah. So that gives me some empathy. I also saw a lot of drug use and abuse of that kind of nature. And so when I see someone who's struggling with that, I recognize that it's not easy to get out of that too. And so that, I know they have a tough journey, and I feel bad for folks who struggle with that. Whereas I think someone who's never had some of those backgrounds, it's just foreign and they can't relate to it.
Yeah, that is very, very true. They don't teach that as much in definitely in higher ed. Where it used to be taught was something that was in school. I taught middle and high school, English teacher, and I had a course was through an in-service that teachers always have to go to something in-service. It's where we get our CEUs. And this one was put on by the bank. So this could be an idea for you. The bank came in and they prepared lesson plans and gave us a challenge to see how we could provide economics into the classroom. So what I did is I created play money, looked like Monopoly, but it was, Johnston money. And I wanted to change their behaviors. And I was able to do that. So and I taught in the projects. And so when I sat in, they came in, they had to bring something with them to write with and some paper. That was hard. These were poor kids. They also had to be seated before the bell rang, and they were not allowed, it was middle school, to push and touch anybody around them because those little bodies are going crazy.
Yeah.
So we were able to adapt. They adapted to that very quickly. And I made mistakes on the board because I wanted them to be engaged.
Yeah.
And if they were actually paying attention to what I was writing, or if I misspelled something, or if I did anything incorrectly, they had to call me out respectfully and I would change it. And so there was all of these challenges I gave them. They had a choice between things that were in a treasure chest and it was anything I could get for free. So it was travel posters, movie posters, the big cutout things, everything was in this room that I had. And then there were smaller things. They could also buy passes if they saved up. They could get a pass to be first one in the lunch line, which was heavily coveted.
Yeah.
They could be the first one on the bus. They always got to leave 5 minutes before the end of the bell. Okay. So they were always one of these people. If they needed to just get out of the room, they could have a pass to do that as long as they didn't disturb people. So what came out of this whole experiment that I did is not only did it change behaviors, but it also got street value, the money. They were buying it. They were actually buying it. So if you're talking about doing it,
great.
So see, you could absolutely tie so many of your passions into this one concept of being able to help and get a bank to support you and bring that curriculum into the classroom and do it as a test, a study, built around it and see how it changes their lives. And it could be longitudinal type of a study where you could see, you're teaching them the values that, you grew up with too, and what you've learned.
That's really charming. I've seen maybe 2 comparable programs. At Unity last summer, they had a guest lecture from this company that was teaching college level, and they also had elementary level courses, and they just give us a snippet of what they're doing. There actually is government money out there to teach financial education. I don't know why it's not in schools. My theory is that it's kind of like religion. People have their own sort of approach they want to take, and it's kind of taboo in a way. But I have seen the Dave Ramsey course. I like that.
I did that too.
Yeah. My friend who has 3 children, she put her kids through that, and I was like, that's wonderful. At least it's a good program to teach the values of what you need to manage your money. So I think there's some stuff out there. It's just unfortunate that and God bless our education system. There's only so much you can put into that bag, right? There's only so much to cover. But financial education has always been a huge gap, and so I hope to one day do that. But I first have to be confident that what I'm going to teach will work. Not in terms of the skills. I think the skills are all there. It's can I get the message across to the young enough audience so they have this language moving forward? And so my kids, like all entrepreneurs, they're sort of the guinea pigs right now. And Finley has had 3 summer businesses. Asher's had 5, something like that. And so they learn entrepreneurship. And
I have some ideas for you based on pre-show, what you said. I went, no, I have some ideas how you can get those kids back into it.
I got to do that. Yeah. The last thing I'll say, I guess we can move on, is a joke around my house, because every time they get more Christmas money or whatever, they're like, Dad, we're not investing it. So they already have this sort of chuckle around investing. But my son does hold stock. He has Apple and Amazon stock, and
very nice.
Finley will too. So
yeah. Well, they can always learn how to tithe, of course, but they could also learn how they could invest money, but not for their personal benefit, of how they can help the world.
Yeah. Well, and that's philanthropy, right? There's you got to get to a certain level of core to protect your ability to exist and survive, and then you have the ability to give and support others as well.
Yeah. We're gonna be good friends after this show. All right. So we're gonna do something here real quick. So I found this study and it was all about power poses. And it's because I watched Grey's Anatomy and they talked about a power pose and it's like Wonder Woman. So you and I were gonna stand up. We're gonna stand up, put our fists on our hips and our legs are slightly apart and we're going to be looking like Wonder Woman. And supposedly it makes you feel more confident if you maintain it for 5 minutes. Now we're not doing 5 minutes. We're just going to stand up. And so for all of our listeners, you got to go to our YouTube channel to see us do this. Okay. So let's go, Chris.
Let's do it.
Okay. Yes. All right.
Okay.
I like it. It was just 30 seconds, but it was fun.
I feel empowered. I feel more closer to Wonder Woman.
Okay, good. Hopefully your kids will go back and watch the show too. All right. So I don't know. I think it was really interesting. There's actual research that does demonstrate that it does instill that. So maybe that's something else that we take to kids so that they can maybe break that negative thought that they have inside of their head about whatever their life situation might be.
I think it's quite valid. There's studies out there. Malcolm Gladwell's Blink book talks about affect, and which is the body language of the face, right? And how there micro expressions that come across your face. Great book, by the way, if you're interested in body language. But so I'm a big believer that you should study body language if you're a manager or a leader, and you're just trying to have a rapport with people. Study affect. And you can see so many things that are passing in meetings or when you're talking with someone, you touch on a topic and you see a little something in body language that you probably need to dig into. It might be a future rejection if you're trying to get something done in your group, or it might be a concern that they have that they're not willing to share with everybody. So I try to teach body language understanding to my managers as well. And or to people, I work with a lot of engineers, and a stereotype of an engineer is that socially we're not that great sometimes.
A little introverted.
Yeah.
A little quiet.
And it does manifest itself sometimes. I do have some engineers who I've spoke with about body language, and I give them body language books and that kind of stuff. So the reason why I talk about body language as a tangent here is because I do believe that it goes both ways.
Yes, so it is a form of communication.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It emanates out from you. It also can transcend into you. So if you're using your body language to pump yourself up, if you're using affect as well, there are studies out there. There's a New York Times article that is one of many that talks about if you use, smile, right, that makes you feel better. So it goes both ways. Now, I'm a big believer in what the study says about you can use power poses to bring yourself up. In fact, when you're doing public speaking and you're learning about public speaking, that matters too, and how you can bring yourself into a stronger presentation if you're using good body language as well. One last thing I'll say on that is I do have an acting background and film background. And so if you watch really good actors and actresses, they are skilled, obviously, with body language, but they're also quite skilled with their affect. And you'll see a micro expression go across their face. And, that's to communicate to you that there's something going on deep inside their mind.
Right.
So they can control that. And so I study it a lot. So I do think that in reverse, it helps, whether it's your face, whether it's your intonation, whether it's your body language, whatever it is.
I like that you said that, because I think of communication between people as 4 things, not the traditional things where we have listening, we have verbal skills, and we have, written skills. I see communication as also visual. And so it's reading that body language. So you are totally supporting that. And what was the name of that book again by?
Oh, Blink.
Yeah.
Now, Malcolm Gladwell. There's a study that he talks about in there. It's a delightful study where they break down the micro expressions, the little things that flash across your face between couples who are arguing and talking through something, and they make predictions on which ones will end up in divorce. But it talks about micro expressions. So if you never heard that term, go read it. It's a delightful book. Go read it. It's a bestseller. But it will talk about micro expressions. It'll give you another dimension to look at when you're studying body language.
I will definitely do that one. And thanks. I've heard of this book before, but I haven't picked it up. I have a gift certificate with Amazon. And it's going to be now one of the books that I go and pick. Okay. So our last question before we take a break here. What do you want to be remembered for in life? You've done a lot and you're memorable now.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Number one, I want to be known as a good dad and husband. And that sort of emotionally drives me. And I don't think I understood it until I had kids, but it's the one core thing I've consistently done besides having an engineering career, is, everything that I do really revolves around how does it affect the family? Does it support the kids? Does it teach them what they need, et cetera? So, that's kind of maybe standard stuff. The one thing that I've always wanted to do is leave one thing behind that's bigger than myself. And so I tend to believe that a good path towards that is creating a story or a lovable character that people identify with and remember, which is why I've done things like the Fro and Trobo and now Stanley, is because the people that we remember, at least personally for me and my personal heroes, are those who have created something that got bigger than themselves. On their own, they created this core character and this core story, but it's a lot bigger than they ever could imagine it to have gotten. It's a bit like winning the lottery, but I hope that I can find at least one character and story that I can make bigger than myself.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Okay, so we're going to take a moment and hear more about Cat 5 Studios, our company that produces our podcast and our game on Steam.
The Intern Whisperer is brought to you by Cat 5 Studios, who help you create games and videos for your training and marketing needs that are out of this world. Visit Cat 5 Studios for more information to learn how Cat 5 Studios can help your business. Thank you, Cat 5 Studios.
And we're back to the second half of our show. Chris Harden is our guest here, and we're going to be talking about the future of jobs and industries in 2030. Chris, what do you think 2030 is going to look like?
It's interesting. 2030 is only 7 years away.
No, it's less than that. We don't count 2030 and we don't count this year. So we're looking at 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. So it's like 5 years.
Terrific. So I actually think it's going to be a lot of the stuff that we're excited about today and the top of the hype cycle around AI is going to be taken for granted. So search engines will be a lot better. We won't have to rifle through the first 10 or 15 items trying to find something. AI is going to be augmented. It's already working that way with Bing, and Google now has introduced Gemini back in December. So I believe that we will have some of the stuff that we're excited about now will be commonplace. Computer vision is already really strong. That's really where I spend a lot of my time on the AI team. Your security systems looking at people's faces and figuring things out as they're in a dangerous situation, et cetera. That's proliferating. It's getting more powerful. And some of the stuff around AI-driven automation will just be taken as a standard. And I believe that's wonderful, which is great. That's what should happen. It should get through the trough on the hype cycle. We should be using it more. But I also believe, just like with other evolutionary steps like the internet and mobile phones, et cetera, that we will be expected to move faster as a result of having access to the technologies like robotics.
So what do you mean by that when you say we will be expected to move faster? Do you mean physically move faster, mentally move faster, evolution of just how we process information and we learn faster? What do you mean by that?
I think efficiency, mainly efficiency. We will be expected to be more efficient with those tools. So like right now, and especially last year, early adopters of AI and the year before too, generative AI in particular, since that's the buzzword, early adopters of that tech, and I specifically books, I can tell you, there are children's books out there. They used it for art and used it for writing. Those folks generated a bunch of books, a bunch of content, and they sold a lot of content really fast. And so they, being early adopters, took advantage and were able to bring in extra income and that kind of stuff. But that advantage gets eaten away as everyone else gets access to it as well.
Right.
So, but that advantage means that they're awesome today because they got the early start. But as we all catch up, now we're all expected to operate at that same level of efficiency. And that's true even like right now, you and I are using the system here with to capture all the video and all the content. That was a lot harder 30 years ago. It was a lot harder 20 years ago. Nowadays, we can set this up pretty quickly and we have good quality. Maybe the quality is as good if you do something at home, but you can still quickly get a video conference, a recording done, and a podcast out the door. And you don't have to have a whole lot of savvy and tech to do it.
That is true.
If you're maybe willing, again, to have a little bit less quality. There's a lot of work that goes into making quality sound, et cetera.
Right.
So we know that stuff exists. We are all expected to perform then with those tools as a standard tool, just like a cell phone. In the 80s and 90s, when cell phones were being adopted, the really early adopters in sales, they could have a car phone, those huge car phones, right?
Right.
And they could make the sale a lot faster than someone who was having to work out of their office and get back to a phone attached to a wall. But now we all have a cell phone. Now you expect to call me and send me a photo like we're doing. you expect it. So now that's no longer an advantage. It's just the norm that we should be performing at.
Have you thought about this? Somebody mentioned it the other day. Have you seen a phone booth anywhere around? I have not. And they said they took a picture of it and put it out there because it's not that long ago that, they were everywhere. And there was a phone like there is on this show right now. We have a desk phone, right?
Yeah.
But we're not going to see that, probably even desk phones.
It's interesting. I did see a phone booth coincidentally, and my son, he plays not Fast and Furious, one of the other ones, and there's a non-playable character in the game in a phone booth. And I said, "What is that guy doing? Is he at an ATM?" And we drove the car a little closer. There's a phone book. It was delightful because I don't think our children even know what a phone book looks like.
They don't. They don't. It's so funny. So incredibly funny. Well, that's a lot of insight there. And I think that you seem like you're engaged with these things too in that AI space. October 8th, that's my birthday. So it was easy to remember. On 60 Minutes, Jeffrey Hinton was the guest for 10, 15 minutes and talked about generative AI. He is the godfather of AI. He created it like 50 years ago or 60 years ago, when everybody was in the lab creating computers. IBM was there, everybody back in the 50s. And he was talking about it. He said, I wish I had never created it because it has the potential of being able to program itself and it can take humanity down. And I feel like that's possible. I think that's totally possible because now the idea is out there. And so anytime science fiction is an indication as to what's going to happen into the world because we have these super high creative people, right? They go, what if we did this? And yes, we're in space. So if he's saying that, obviously it's possible.
Well, and there's two factions out there. There are a lot of thought leaders trying to figure out how to restrict AI so that it doesn't
boundaries.
Doesn't get out of hand. There's regulation, and as you guys probably are aware, even just in defense of their own careers, writers and actors, did strikes last year to protect themselves from AI generated content and film, right? So there are leaders out there. There's a coalition who are trying to put governance around GPTs and large language models in general to be sure that it doesn't get out of hand. But, there's also another faction that goes, look here, guys, it's not that awesome yet. And let's be realistic. There's an impact. If you look at the evolution of large language models this past year, once GPT sort of kicked it off, you could make it say or do almost anything, including what people would consider to be dangerous or racist or whatever. And now there's all these basically wrappers that they put around and limits on all these models. It'll no longer teach you how to make a bomb, as an example that comes up often in podcasts. The same content's on the internet, and you can find it if you want it.
Sure.
But these companies are afraid that if they don't start putting boundaries on AI, it could get out of hand, or they could get sued, perhaps. And what happens is, though, I listened to a great podcast out of Australia, and these guys are engineers and they use all the different models, and it dumbs down the model so it can't perform as well as it used to.
Oh, interesting.
So there's a real side effect to trying to regulate it too soon, and they see the impact on some models that were great, like I can't think of the one that's coming to mind, but anyhow, they when they wrap all this protection around it, it can't perform as well. And usually the private companies are doing that, whereas the open source ones are less protected and you can do more with it. So I think there may be risk one day in AI taking over the world, but I don't see it anytime soon. I try to use ChatGPT a lot. My daughter and I at night will lay in the bed and we'll make a story with ChatGPT. And what I found is that it can really quickly create a story that handles all the standard beats that you would have in a storytelling situation, but it can't really create something new and different. It's really standard.
So I'm going to give you something to counter with your daughter.
Okay.
And then it's keeping that balance of what we're going to be talking about in a little bit. Okay. This is what chat does. Now, what can you do that's different from this, and have her manually write it out or type it in a keyboard? But there's way more involved when she's having to use, cursive writing or print, which cursive is faster. I don't know why they don't teach it, but nonetheless, that way she'll be able to see that she's more creative than whatever comes out of any of this stuff.
Yeah, she's actually really creative too.
Yeah.
one last note on that little bit about creativity. So AI is really good at optimizing things that we already do well. It's trained on the data of the internet. So you can get it to paint a really gorgeous picture of whatever we talked about earlier. My typical example is a snowman. If I have it paint a snowman, if it's using it's called a diffusion model, stable diffusion or whatever, it can be absolutely gorgeous and brilliantly fast. But I do not expect AI anytime soon to make an Olaf, because Olaf is not your standard character. It's really creative what they did to make Olaf. We can do that as humans. I have no idea that AI can ever do that right now. And so it can optimize what we do really fast, but it can't really create, even if it makes it beautiful. It's not really creating something new and different. And it can't get there because it's just a statistics model. That's all it is.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's one guy's opinion. But
wow, that was super insightful. I really, really appreciated all of that great information that you shared. Well, we know that technology is advancing at the blink of an eye, and it's delivered immediately. And there is a false measurement of real knowledge and learning, which results in the controversy around the decline of reading due to technological advances. Now, I did some research on this because we have technology, and then we have the things that we hold called books, because it engages more of our senses. And this particular quote that I just read all came from author Sarosi Mullen, and she wrote, "Is the rise in technology causing a decline in our reading habits?" Now, it came from Medium on 2020, but there was this other study that was out here, and they were still talking about how reading, actually holding the book, the smell of the book and everything that you can actually experience through all of your senses is more beneficial than having to be exposed to all of these things that we have. It talked about the benefits of adults reading aloud to children are incredibly high. Elizabeth Hubick wrote in her article, "Reading aloud to students should not get lost in the shift of science and reading." And it came from Education Week. And then there was another quote that said, "The single act of reading aloud to children can provide multiple benefits. Perhaps most significantly, it can develop a lifelong interest in pleasure reading, according to multiple literacy experts and studies on the subject." Now, I know you're going to be having a lot of good information to share, but I can tell you, I would do this as, again, a public classroom teacher, and I taught 9th, 10th grade. I had some 11th graders also at one time. And I would say, last 10 minutes, everybody pack up your stuff. And I would read to them. And I literally saw these grown children, they're adults, they're young adults, but their heads on their desk, and they would just sit and listen. And it was the perfect time to do any type of a room evaluation, because teachers are always having to be evaluated if they're a good teacher. And it was amazing to me because they would instantly go, "Oh, okay." And they would pack it all away because they enjoyed having somebody read to them. So your thoughts, what is it that you think? Because I know you have thoughts, which is why you created Stanley and TROBO.
Well, that's really charming. I have not heard of that being done in high school.
Oh, no, not many teachers did what I did. I did different stuff. Yeah,
That's
thank
really
you.
Yeah, I love reading to our kids. We've always read to Asher and to Finley since as early as we possibly could. They have libraries, in their own rooms, and we're currently reading Harry Potter #1 with Finley, which is wonderful. So we're big believers of reading to the kids every night. It's a great bonding opportunity. It's a special time with just them. So we will continue to do that. But yeah, I struggle a lot because, I work in video games, and video games are often
everything you do is online in your work.
And they're a distraction from life, in my opinion. So I have my own personal issues there. But what I have seen is that the kids, whether it's their businesses, they're interested in doing their summer business, they're interested in going out and practicing sports. And not so much reading the physical books. They still read physical books. They have the ones they love, and so they'll still read the physical books. But I have found that the more screen time they get, the less engaged they are in anything outside of whatever's on that screen, whether it's video games,
right?
If it's honestly, if it's watching something like Paw Patrol. But even if they're reading a book on the device, I don't really like that as much as a physical book, if I can get it. There's a benefit. You don't have a billion books in your house. My wife's a huge reader, and she used to have just stacks and stacks of all these books, and now she's just got her Kindle. But it can cause them to zone out and not be aware of the world and how much time has passed. So we'll have days where we completely shut off all devices. They used to never have them, but as good intention as we have as parents, we've slipped, and I see it more and more where they'll get them more time. And, other game activities, family game night activities, other things just that we have in toys in the house are just less interesting to them than a device, regardless of what's on it, even if it's, junky content where they're not learning anything. Yeah. And they're just, anyway. So, I struggle with that a lot. In fact, over this past winter break, I'm in front of a TV screen all day long because I'm on computer software.
Right.
So for 2 weeks, I just kind of shut down all my devices, and I didn't do any work on Stanley. Once Christmas was done, I was done with Stanley. Nothing at work. I was out for 2 weeks, and it was just all these activities I want to get done in the house and get things fixed. And it felt present. It felt in the moment.
Right.
There's a spiritual teacher, Eckhart Tolle, and he talks about the power of now. It's a bit of a long book, but the concept is if you can get all of the stuff that's going on in your mind quiet and you can just listen to your current moment, it can help you to rid yourself of stresses and the kind of stuff that we have as people who are trying to reach the next level of ourselves and all that. So I don't want to go too far down that path, but going into Christmas or the winter holiday, I just said, okay, I'm not going to do any devices. I'm just going to focus on now. And whether it was yard work, fixing things in the house, fixing stuff in the car, whatever it was really nice just to experience existing without knowing I've got a screen to look at for my next 6 hours, because I'm always in meetings and stuff. And I realized while I was doing this, the kids were, playing video games or they were watching a YouTube thing or whatever. And I'm like, so I'm really unsettled about how I see the encroachment on screen time coming into our lives, which is why with Stanley, there's no digital anything. And the game is a book and it's a physical interactive game where they run around the house. And the candy thing is they make things with their hands with candy. So I like that more and more where they're the center of the experience and it's not digital. If I can help it, I don't know, it'll never be digital, but I do want it to be core, not digital.
I like that very, very much. You said several things that I'm going to bounce back to you. So if you're wanting the whole family to unplug, then everybody unplugs. And then maybe you go for a walk. Yeah. One of the things that I do is I go, well, I need to get my steps in. So I put my Nike app on, but I put it on total mute. I do not have music. I do not have anything. I use that as a gratitude walk. And I go through, okay, for 3 miles, 5 miles, I'm going to go through everything I have to be grateful for. And then I'm also like listening and observing and seeing things, even though I put my headphones in because it's just me, because I don't want anybody to bother me, because I walk around the lake at Lake Eola or wherever. So it makes a difference because it looks like I'm engaged, but I'm not. And I went, people don't know how, and I'm sure you experience this, how to walk without a phone being the center at the dinner table, out at dinner. You're even in a movie theater, you're watching a movie, but yet you have something going on with your phone. And I think that if you make it a family thing and say, okay, once a week or twice a week or 3 times a week, whatever, that becomes, this is what we do. The grid's gone down. We have to engage. We play board games. We go out and we go, okay, what are you grateful for? And you do it for a mile. You might see something different, but it's going to be everybody doing it. And those will become the memories that your children will cherish more than what they did on the screen.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. I tell my son all the time, baby, no one's going to remember what you did. And
do you guys go camping?
Game. We don't camp, I'll admit. Now, we've done a little bit of camping, but that's really not my thing.
You can still camp in your house is the point. You can still do it in the backyard and go, okay, well, we're camping and we're not going, you can use the bathrooms, but that's it. There's nothing else. Cook your food on the grill, everything.
That's very charming.
You could totally wrap it in aluminum foil and just do it that way. There's like so many things that you can do to unplug. And I think that's the incentive I'm giving you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like that you have all of these great things there, pros and cons of doing this, of reading. Now you've covered most of them. Is there anything else that you want to add to it?
No, I think we hit the beats. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. What is the best mentoring advice that you want to share with our listeners?
I guess it comes from my own personal drive, but I want to make sure that my kids have the financial tools they need to do well in life. So I suggest that anyone who's listening to, if you don't have the benefit of someone who's taught you about building personal wealth, go and learn. There are books out there, Sometimes they're not cheap, but you can get the basics in. And the goal is that you teach yourself personal financial wealth building so that you can teach your kids. And it has changed my world in many ways. It's a long journey. I look back and I know that I should have done more of my activities that I do now when I was younger, but I didn't. And I encourage you to start soon and learn it so that you can teach your kiddos.
That's solid advice. Solid. So our listeners, usually we supply your LinkedIn profile and your company LinkedIn, but we can take the Unity off one and use your website for your book. I think we're going to do that too. We're going to share your Mastering Commitment book that you have published also, and the Stanley Candy Cane Wormhole. Is there anything else that you'd like us to share with our listeners, or just definitely give a shout out so our listeners know what I'm talking about?
I think those are fine. So chrisharden.com, and you can find my books on Amazon, or if you want to go to, findstanley.net or candycanewormhole.com. Those are all there.
Cool. Well, we will definitely do that. And I want to thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, I think so. And I'm going to remember our power pose. Yeah, very good.
The Intern Whisperer is brought to you by Cat 5 Studios. Thank you to our video editor, Max Stein. Our music is by Sophie Lloyd. Visit Employers for Change at www.e4c.tech to learn how you can create real diversity and inclusive culture while skilling your people for the future of work. You can support the Intern Whisperer by subscribing to us on Podbean, our Employers for Change YouTube channel, or follow us on your favorite podcast streaming app.